Hello, everybody. I am just about to be joined by Zoe Clark-Coates, and we will be talking about all things loss, baby loss awareness, and helping people when they. Hello, Zoe. There she is. Just connecting. Hello to everyone who's joining. Nice to see you this evening. Just waiting for the connection. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, all good.
Good. Lovely to see everyone joining. So thank you very much. I think you may have seen from the video that we posted this morning, but we're going to be talking about baby loss, the grief that you face with that, and also your strategies and ways to cope with pregnancy after loss. So for anyone who's joining who follows Fertility Help Hub, please could you start with a little intro about yourself and the amazing foundation that you've set up, and then we can go from there.
Great. So I'm Zoe Clark-Coates, on Instagram, Zoe Adele, and I'm the CEO globally of the Mariposa Trust. And most people are more aware of the trust under the primary division's name, which is Saying Goodbye. And we support over 50,000 people a week through baby loss and through pregnancy following loss. We've also got lots of other subdivisions that offer support through fertility treatment, through adoption, through being given a fatal diagnosis over a baby, and many other divisions such as that. I'm also an author. I've got a TV show on Sky where I interview people about their grief stories and things that really change their lives, that they've turned into either a positive or found purpose and direction from it. And I'm an author, so I've written 3 books, and my 4th book comes out in November, and that's called Pregnancy After Loss.
Amazing. And we've just recorded a podcast together, so
Yeah.
that is for anyone who wants to hear our full interview. That is available on the Fertility Help Hub website, so fertilityhelphub.com, and it's fresh off the press, so have a listen to that. So tell us a bit more about what you do at the trust and the kind of people you help, and some of your strategies for helping with loss. And I just also wanted to say, anyone watching or listening, if you want to ask any questions at any point, please feel free to.
Absolutely. So as I said, the main thing that we do is we walk alongside people who are going through baby loss, and that might be the couple themselves, or it may be other members of the family, siblings, grandparents, anybody. And anybody who needs support, we support them. And whatever type of loss it is, that's really important for people to know. So it can be really early on, as soon as somebody's found out they're pregnant, right the way up to losing a 4-year-old child. We will walk alongside people, and that can manifest in very different forms, from befriending, where we match people with a befriender, through to people attending our international services of remembrance that happen globally at cathedrals around the world. So that's how we support people. The other part of what we do as a charity is we do a lot of campaigning and campaign for change. So part of that is I was asked by the Secretary of State for Health to co-chair the national review into how people are supported. So I work directly for government on that, where I advise on how we can make changes so the care people receive at the time of going through their loss and after is first class, because sadly in the UK support hasn't been great. The government are really committed to changing that, and that's part of my job, to advise on what changes could be made, what that could look like, whether that be in hospital settings or in GPs or in the community. If you need support, basically we just want it to be first class, and we don't want there to be a variance of care as well around the country. I think that's really important, where at the moment you can go to one hospital or one GP practice and get excellent care and excellent treatment, then you can go somewhere else in the country and receive really poor care. And we need to see that change. We need to see the fact that wherever you go, whoever you see, you will be given compassionate, empathetic care that's not only great medically, but also really great for people emotionally. Because what's been shown from many studies and years of work in this area is that a lot of people can almost cope with the loss of their baby, and they can get through that. But what is often the sticking point for people is how they were treated. And that can often cause really significant trauma. And we need to see that changed, because often we can't change the fact that people are going to lose a baby. A lot of those losses will never be able to be prevented. But what we can make sure is, if someone goes through the worst thing in the world, that they get great care.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also that stems from your own experience of loss, doesn't it? And
It does.
the image that you posted, I think, today was such a powerful one. I mean, gosh, it must resonate with so many people.
Absolutely, without fail, that image, and I've got a few of them, and we had it created for my first book, Saying Goodbye, and I really wanted a visual demonstration of what our family looks like, because often people will just see a family and presume that's the family unit. Well, actually, there's so much more. So for myself and my husband, Andy, we've lost 5 children. So our family doesn't look like what you would see walking down the street right now, 2 adults and 2 children. There's 5 little ones missing. And I wanted to be able to kind of demonstrate that in a visual form, which is why we had that picture created. And people always then contact me about it because they want them for their own family. So we actually now offer those as part of what we do as a charity and part of our fundraising. And people can supply a picture of their family unit, and then our design team add the shadows of children at whatever age they want into those pictures. And it's a way of helping us fundraise. So anybody can have one of those pictures, and it is really beautiful. And it, you know, the first time I saw it, I mean, I rarely cry now. The children I've lost just bring me joy now, and I just smile when I talk about them. But when that picture did hit my inbox, it did make me cry. And I think it was because that there's in the picture, there's one child running quite a long way ahead, and that's just how the designer created it. But my instinct as a mum was to go, no, don't go that far. That's not safe. I would never let my child run that far ahead without me. And that just made me cry, because I was just like, I can't protect that child because that child's already gone ahead. And but that's the power of grief. You journey with it forever, and it comes off in layers, and I will grieve them for the rest of my life, but they also make me smile constantly. And that's the beauty of processing grief.
And how does your husband react to that photo? Similar to you?
Yeah, initially both of us, it was kind of like a breath being taken away moment. Now we just see it as a beautiful representation as our family. And yeah, we both absolutely love it. It's just really, really special, because I think it just gives that physical acknowledgement of what we've lost. And it shows the world that without us having to explain it, without people having to find words. And that's why imagery is so powerful, isn't it? And those creative arts. Because it gives us a way of explaining our story in a different way, which is a big part of what I do. It's a big part of why I write, and I'm a quote writer, because it's about giving people the words to explain what they've gone through. And that's one thing we're just not taught as British people, especially, because other cultures are really great at dealing with loss. But in the UK, we're really bad at it. We're really bad at talking about loss. We're really bad at talking about pain. And we're told we're doing really well if we put a fake smile on our faces and are out there, and considered almost weak if we show too much emotion, where it's the exact opposite is the case. To be able to show emotion shows real strength. And what we need to be doing is encouraging people to talk. But because we've not been raised in talking about pain, in talking about discomfort, often when people go through moments of real crisis, such as child loss and baby loss, they don't know how to explain it. They don't have the vocabulary to explain it or the words to explain it, which is where my work really comes in and why people share my quotes. I mean, I can share something on Facebook and it can be shared and seen by over 5 million people in 48 hours.
Wow.
And that is just because, it's not because I'm an especially great writer. I don't believe that at all. I think it's just
people need the words.
People need the words, and they haven't been given that opportunity to be able to share little chunks of information that make them go, that's how I feel, and I just don't know how to communicate it. Or I would have put it like that, but the world has never given me permission to, or given me the freedom to be able to explain it. And so they borrow my quotes and my words and share it on their social media platforms, and it actually tells their family and friends and their wider community exactly how they're feeling.
Fantastic. That's incredible. Some people have just asked, how do you move on? How do you cope with the grief? What are your suggestions for that?
Well, processing it, that's crucial. Acknowledging it's there, not treating it like the elephant in the room and not going near it. That's the most important thing with grief. We have to acknowledge it. We have to give it a seat at the table and say you're welcome. However much we don't want it there because we want our loved one in that seat, we have to say it's welcome. And it's acknowledging the fact that you don't need to hold on to the grief to hold on and connect to that lost loved one. That's really important. And people will often try and almost hold on to the grieving process and the pain, feeling like that's their way of connecting to their loved one still. But pain won't ever connect you to them, and your grief doesn't connect you to them. Your love connects you to them, and that will always be the case. And as soon as you acknowledge that, and as soon as you welcome that and say, I only hurt this much because I love that much, and it suddenly gives you permission to be able to process it. And that's one of the things that my books do. And they have got almost training sections within them and journaling section that enables people to just explore their grief, to learn how to dive in there and not run from it. And as soon as you do that, that's where you find your joy is on the other side of that pain. So it's just giving yourself the freedom to process it. Don't believe any lie that there's a specific way to grieve, because everyone has their own journey and path through grief. Nothing's right, nothing's wrong. You've just got to give yourself permission to embrace it. And by doing certain exercises and allowing yourself to feel things emotionally, eventually you will move through it.
And we do talk a bit about this in the podcast, so I don't want to spoil it for those who are about to listen. But you chose to name your children, and also obviously find out the sex of your children. And I've just published an article of a reader of Fertility Help Hubs who talks about what not to say to someone who's had a miscarriage, and some of the things that can be hurtful, which people probably don't realize they're not saying intentionally to upset someone. As we talk about in the podcast, it's more about feeling like they need to say something and not knowing what to say and sort of panicking a little bit. And in that, she talks also about the fact that it doesn't need to matter, it shouldn't matter when the loss was, it's still a loss. And that's something that we talk about in the podcast. So can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer that gestation plays no part in the grieving process, and it certainly shouldn't be. If a loss was at a certain point, then that's considered worse than a loss at an earlier gestation or whatever point. A loss is a loss in a person's grief is totally relevant and totally justifiable. However they feel, that's okay. And it shouldn't be considered, well, they've got more of a reason to grieve because they lost a child a month after I lost a child, for instance. It has no part in it. You're grieving because you lost a loved one. So whether that be your baby or another family member, and that loss is significant, and that loss deserves to be acknowledged, and it brings as much pain to you as the pain of a further on loss or a different loss would to somebody else, because it's all relative to your circumstance and to your life. And so that's why it's really important that we don't rob ourselves from the permission and the space to grieve because we consider our neighbour or a family member worse off than we are, because actually it's just rumors, it's just society that tells us this, that well, they've gone through something worse, and eventually it seeps into our psyche and we start to believe it. But it's not true. Every loss is relevant and every loss deserves to be acknowledged. And as for giving support and advice to other people, in the Baby Loss Guide, which is my main book for guiding people through losing a child, and in Beyond Goodbye, which is a general grief book. So Beyond Goodbye is for anybody who's lost a partner or a sibling or a parent. It's general grief, where the Baby Loss Guide is specifically for babies and children. But in both of those books, there's chapters totally dedicated to what to say and what not to say, and giving practical advice and how to offer good support that will be really received well. And when I started writing, I didn't know whether I wanted to list all the things you shouldn't say. I kind of wanted to just steer and just say this and everything's great. But because of the quantity of people we support every week, the one thing I hear day in, day out from people is, I just can't believe they said that. I just can't believe my own mum said this to me, or my sister or my brother or whoever. And I spent my life again explaining, but when they said that, they probably meant this, and when they said that, they probably meant to just try and rescue you. And I know that's not the case, but they wouldn't have chosen to cause you further pain. And it made me realize it had to be laid out in black and white of what to say and what not to say. Because I think when you haven't been through loss, you're so uneducated in the terminology around loss, in the way that a bereaved person's brain works, that you can say something with just the bestest heart in the world, not thinking for a moment it's going to cause pain. And unless someone says, actually, if you say this, that's belittling their grief, that's belittling their loss. If you say to somebody who has got a child with them but has just lost a child, well, at least you've still got Tabitha still, even though you lost Martha. But the bereaved parent is not going to hear you offering any sort of hope in that. What they hear is you're saying to me that it's okay that I've lost one child because I've got another, which is the equivalent of me going to another parent and saying, well, which child would you choose to lose? Pick a child. And they go, oh my goodness, I would have never even thought of it like that. I just thought I was trying to find the silver lining in a horrible situation. And of course it's a brilliant thing that they've got another child in their home. Of course it is. Anyone would say and feel that. The parents will think that, thank goodness I've got another child. But it's not up to anybody else to say that. And as soon as you try and find a silver lining in anything as horrendous as loss, baby loss, or other grief as well, you're robbing people of the chance to grieve, and you're telling them to That's why it's so important that we don't try and rescue people, that we don't try and find the silver lining in things, that we allow people to be in that place of pain and say, I can't rescue you. I can't even imagine how you're feeling right now. But what I can do is I can sit with you. I can hand you the tissues. I can help you with anything that you need help from, because I can't rescue emotionally, but I know that's not what you need me to do. What you need is a friend. What you need is love. What you need is somebody to sit in silence, as a vigil next to you. That's what people need. And so that's why I realized we needed a whole chapter there of what not to say. And if you say this is what a bereaved person hears. If you say that, they're going to feel this. And the amount of positive feedback I've had from people who said it's just so helpful to be told specifically what not to say, because it's all been guesswork up until now. So that's why it's all in there. And what has been brilliant is that people have not only bought books for themselves, they've also bought books and sent them via Amazon to family members and said,
wow,
look, could you read
great.
this book so you know how to support me well, so you know, so you can get it. And that's even stopped them needing to explain what they're going through. It's a time where the last thing they need is to be explaining grief to anyone, because they're in the depth, they're in that black hole of grief. You don't want to be explaining to a family member what you're feeling. So they can send the book and say, read this, and that means you get a good grasp of what I'm going through, but you also have loads of advice within those pages to know how to help me well.
Absolutely. And also, I think that when we did the podcast together, you talked a little bit about some of the comments that you were faced with yourself, and you talked a bit about, or maybe in your bio, you talked a bit about how you used to, and practice is the wrong word, but you would have different phrases to answer different questions, and nothing ever felt quite right. Is that what you would say?
Yeah,
what's
absolutely.
your advice for answering these questions that aren't quite right?
Yeah, in terms of, I think the question you're probably meaning about is like, do you acknowledge the fact that you've lost children? Do you, when people say, how many children have you got, Zoe? What do I say? Do I say 2 or do I say 7? You know, what do I say? And for a long while now, I did have to practice what to say in every situation, because I wanted to be prepared, and I didn't want to be in a supermarket, somebody asked me something, and I end up, which is what every bereaved person will tell you they end up doing, supporting the person who's just asked them, because you end up feeling so bad that you've shared your truth, they've ended up crying, and you end up trying to rescue them. And that's the life of a bereaved person. You end up constantly rescuing people to stop them feeling bad when you're actually the bereaved person. And so the best way to handle that is to prepare answers and to realize the fact that there's no right or wrong. Again, I quickly learned, if somebody asked me, how many children have you got? They were literally asking me, how many children are you raising? How many children are in your home? They're not asking, how many babies have you carried in your womb? They're asking on a very basic level. And so however I answered that, there was no guilt. There should be no guilt connected to it at all. There was no right or wrong answer. I could answer, yes, I've got 2 children, or yes, I've got 7, and either was perfectly right. But it's by practicing that you become really confident, and then eventually nothing flummoxed me. Anybody could ask me anything, and I was absolutely fine with it. But that takes practice, and it takes time, and it also takes you having processed your grief and having worked through your pain. If you're still in a really dark place and in a place of your rawest part of grief, then you're not going to be okay answering anything. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. And it might take you years to get there. It might take you 20 years to get there. Some, they may never get there. But that's all okay, because that's your story. This is my story that I'm sharing. Your story is yours. And so it's just getting practiced. It's processing that pain. And the more you process it, the better you get at communicating about it.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. What about for family members, for grandparents, or for siblings, for example, who are also grieving the loss of a family member?
Yeah, well, we've actually got a division at the Mariposa Trust within sayinggoodbye.org called Loving Every Tear. And that division is totally about offering support to family members. So that is not just so they can help their loved ones through the loss. It's also so their loss can be acknowledged too. Loss never just affects the couple. As I said previously, it always has this domino effect where it affects multiple family members and beyond a family unit. It affects friends and it affects community, and it's really important to acknowledge that and to say, whether it's your child or a grandchild or your niece or nephew or a friend's child, you've got a right to grieve too, because you've been touched by that loss. And so yes, it might not be the primary concern at the time of the loss. Of course, the parents are going to be that focus point. But at some point, it's really important that you too acknowledge your loss and allow yourself to grieve properly. Because if you don't, then that can also affect how you offer support later on and how you can continue on with your life, because grief needs to be processed. Tears of grief are actually made up of a completely different substance as tears of joy, which I just think is amazing. Tears of grief have got certain chemicals in them and they need to be released. It's how we were created. And if we don't release them, it can have a knock-on effect on mental health, on physical health. There's an old saying that says if you don't allow your tears to come out, your internal organs will weep instead. Really? And that's so true physically. There's a real knock-on effect if you don't allow pain to be processed. So whether you're a grandparent or any other family member, it's really important that you give yourself time, that you work through the grief guides in my book as well, and allow your pain to be processed. And through that, not only will you move through your grief healthily, you'll be a much better support to that family member too.
That sounds invaluable. So everyone check those books out. Thank you so much. And what would your advice be for people who have experienced a loss or several losses and they're pregnant again? Because obviously you've been in that scenario and it must be a very daunting time.
It's so terrifying. I believe a lot of my fight or flight responses that became really maximized, most people assume that would have happened because of the losses, but actually I think that really happened because of pregnancy following loss, because the whole of that 9 months you are on high alert, constantly terrified. Every time you go to the bathroom, you're terrified of seeing blood, and you are on high alert from the moment you find out you're pregnant until the baby's in your arms. And even then the fear doesn't leave, because you're terrified that that baby's going to be taken away from your arms. And so that's where we have to be really mindful in trying to control anxiety. And when I was asked by my publisher to write book number 4, which is called Pregnancy After Loss, it comes out in November, but we're actually trying to get a e-copy available sooner than November. So even though the hard copy won't be in the shops until then, I'm really hoping the fact in the next few months it might be available on Kindle, because they just want to support people through this pandemic. But when I set about writing that, I felt like I was going to be writing a pregnancy guide. So I went into it with that frame of mind. And within a couple of days of sitting with my computer, I was like, what am I doing? There are so many pregnancy guides out there. What did I need? And that's always my go-to. What did I need to help me survive the journey? I was like, what I needed was a guide of how to navigate fear. Almost a war plan of how to fight the worry and to survive this 9-month journey, which doesn't feel like 9 months, it feels like eternity. And so that's what I wrote. It's a war plan. It's a guide to get you from the point you find out you're pregnant right the way till having a baby in your arms. So it has exercises, it has practical information, it has a day check-in every single day. It gives you something, whether that be advice from an expert, whether that be a relaxation exercise, quotes and journaling exercises, right the way through. And that's what I needed, because the best thing that you can do is to learn to fight the fear and practice mindfulness, and try and staying as present as possible, and giving yourself again to have permission to grieve still, because the next pregnancy you go through will be bringing up loads of different layers of grief from your previous loss as well. So it's giving yourself permission to still process that, and knowing that's really healthy. And the more you can do that, the better off you'll be when you deliver your next child, if you've processed even more of that grief. At the same time as preparing your mind and body to welcome a new little one into your home when you're absolutely convinced that will never happen. That's the challenge, and that's what I've done in the book.
And you talk about that in the podcast that we've just done together.
Yeah, I definitely touch on that. Yeah, so people need to really listen to that.
You talk about the fact that even on the way to the hospital, didn't want to jinx anything, and even putting the car seat in the car was kind of something that you just didn't acknowledge because
Well,
you
it
didn't believe
wasn't.
it was happening.
Yeah, it's not about not wanting to jinx it. I don't believe in that. So I don't believe the fact that you can do something that would then cause that. What I couldn't believe was the fact that the bottom had fallen from our world so many times that I couldn't believe that this time we'd bring a baby home, because I'd never had that as the end of my story. Every single story had ended in heartbreak, that the rug had been pulled from under us and disaster had happened. So how then does your brain even comprehend a different ending if all you've had every single time is the loss and the tears at the end? How can you even imagine what the joy will feel like if you've never ever experienced that?
But did all of that apprehension go once she was born? I mean, there's always a huge amount of anxiety and worry for your children when they're even here, isn't there, in terms of keeping them safe as a baby and at any stage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's where it really helped that I was a trained counsellor and my mum was a therapist too. So that's where that really did help, where I was able to consciously keep making that choice of knowing therapy-wise what you need to do, because I was really aware that the fear and terror of losing them all the way through pregnancy could instantly be transferred to this little one now in my arms. What if they don't stay? And that doesn't mean that I was able to free myself from having all those worries, because absolutely I did. I was terrified of cot death. I was terrified of all these things that the health visitor would come into our home and say, look, you've got to be aware of this and this and this and this, and you're like, I don't want to hear all these negative and horrible things. I just want to stay thinking the best is going to happen. But you're actually not able to do that, because the world is constantly trying to say, right, this is how you can prevent this and this is how you can prevent that. So you're always hearing that information. So it's how you handle it, how you say, okay, there's these things I can do to prevent that from happening. But once I've done all those things, I have to trust that everything will be okay. And so it took real hard work to do that after Esme, who was the first little one we got to bring home, to do that. But I managed it. And that meant I absolutely loved being a mum. That all of the loss we'd gone through didn't rob me of the joy of raising her at all. And then likewise when we brought Bronte home from the hospital, sadly we lost another 2 babies after Esme, and then we got to bring Bronte home. And again, the same happened. It didn't rob me of the joy. Did it mean I didn't experience fear at all? No, absolutely not. We're not robots. We're meant to experience fear. That's how we are wired, and it's how we all stay alive. So if you try and stop yourself ever experiencing fear and worry, you'd actually be putting yourself in huge danger, because it's something we're meant to feel. But when you put healthy boundaries around it and you do the work, you can actually stop yourself being flooded by fear and worry. So you can experience it. It can keep you safe. You might have to do a little battle there to keep some of it at bay, but then you can actually live in joy and live with happiness, and not let that fear rob you of enjoyment, which sadly so many people do. I mean, we support so many people who have journeyed for years trying to have a child, and then once their child arrives in their arms, they can't experience any joy, because they're just so caught up in the terror that their baby won't get to stay with them forever. And so they just live in fear, and that's just so sad and so heartbreaking. But with the right support, you can get through that, and you can practically put skills in place, from CBT therapy training to so many other things that can actually mean you can enjoy life after loss. There is joy on the other side of loss. I'm happier today than I ever was before losing 5 children. And that is because I grieved well. And I allowed myself to feel joy, and I knew the fact that I'm not connected to the babies I've lost through pain. I'm connected to them through love. And so the best way of celebrating their lives is by embracing life, experiencing joy, and living well in their honour.
So inspiring, so inspiring. And the last thing I just want to touch on that we do talk about quite a bit in the podcast that we've done is not blaming yourself, because that must be something that you hear all the time. I mean, how can people change their mindset to tell themselves that really this was out of their control?
Yeah, and then this is a part of the grieving process for many people, not just with baby loss, with other loss as well. And but it is especially prominent with baby loss, and more so with the mums, and that's because we carry the child. And so we ultimately often blame ourselves of, why couldn't I keep my baby safe? Why did they die? Is it something I've done? But that's really about not just the grieving process, it's about feeling utterly out of control. And when you oh, you went all dark.
I think we've lost the power on my end.
Oh no.
So now I'm in the dark. I'm going to open the windows slightly. Sorry about that. Please carry on, because it's so important what you're saying.
Yeah, and so it's our brain's way of trying to find a way of staying in control. And if your brain can convince you to blame yourself, then suddenly you can prevent this loss from happening again in the future. Because if you accept responsibility for it, well, if it was because I picked up that really heavy bag of shopping, well, next time I won't pick it up. So I can prevent it in the future. So it gives you this sense of regaining control, but it's false, and it's false guilt, because actually you didn't do anything in the first place, and nothing you do in the future would change the scenario. So it's about seeing what your brain is trying to do, and if you can acknowledge it and almost sit back and go, okay, brain, that's what you're trying to get me to do, but it's not my fault, even if I want to accept it, and almost view it as a third party trying to intrude, and acknowledge what it's trying to do, but be understanding about it and say, I know why you're doing that, and it's just to try and make me feel this, but actually it's not my fault, even if I want it to be my fault, because it would help me journey forwards. It's not my fault, and so I have to lay that down.
And it sounds like that's a very common feeling. So people should,
so common,
realize that they're not alone in that feeling. And
so common. And guilt with grief is just one of these packages, just like fear and grief go hand in hand. It's very hard to experience grief and not to experience real fear and worry and anxiety. And the same goes with guilt, whether it be the loss of a spouse or a parent, where you then feel guilty for not spending enough time with them, and if I'd done this, would that have happened? And it's this bargaining that our brain tries to do just to get control of the situation. And because you're trying to process so much trauma, the brain just gets flooded and can't handle it, and so it's just trying to rescue itself, really, and going, okay, could this have been prevented? How do we survive this in the future? And it's part of how we're created, just to stay safe, where we are programmed to assess the terrain and to find all those potholes to stop ourselves falling down them in the future. But sadly, it's not possible to prevent it, but it's part of the process. And it's saying, okay, I understand why I'm feeling that, but it's not the truth. It's not your fault.
Great advice. Thank you so much. So I think there were some questions before, which were general fertility questions. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to send them my way, and I can pass them on to some of the experts at Fertility Help Hub, medical experts. But Zoe, just for anyone else who didn't hear us at the beginning, we did a podcast together where we talk a lot more about everything we've just been talking about. Oh, I think the lights are about to come back on. Sorry about that. I'm sat in the dark now. We talk more about the topics and areas that we've touched on. So definitely give that a listen. Go to fertilityhelphub.com, and it's right there in the recent articles, and that's a podcast available across all podcast channels and on our website. So thank you so much for chatting with us tonight.
That's amazing. Yeah, and if anybody needs any support, just head to www.sayinggoodbye.org and you'll find all of the support that you can need. You can be matched with befrienders, find details of all the services that we do. And my books are all available in all good bookshops or on Amazon, since no one can go anywhere at the moment.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm losing the internet now. Oh, someone just said, I wish your book was out now, I could do with it, but hopefully there'll be a digital copy soon.
I know, absolutely. And in the meantime, if you get the baby loss guide, that touches on pregnancy after loss, and it will also help you process any unprocessed grief and feelings you've got. So the baby loss guide is a really great book to start off with, even if you're pregnant again now, because it does touch all on pregnancy too.
Great. The other thing I can do, Zoe, is when it is available, whether that's digitally or when the paperback comes out, send it out in my newsletter, telling people it's available, so people know that they can find it. So yeah,
that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of
the evening.
Thank you.
Lovely chatting with you.
You too. Bye.